Yeah, my name is Luerkens. This is Jessica Kirkpatrick. As was just mentioned, we work for Dept of Ecology in the Bellingham field office, and basically Erica just did a good job describing kind of the long-term, why we care about fecal coliform and a lot of the efforts that have been ongoing up here in Whatcom County. Jessica and I started about 3 years ago now working up here in Whatcom County. We're based out of the Bellingham office. And our focus has been working out in the Whatcom County and primarily in the Nooksack Basin, trying to work with farmers to reduce trying to reduce fecal coliform pollution that's going into our water bodies. So, it's tricky.
Put it on the other side.
The other side?
Right.
Really?
Because you're going to be looking that way.
Okay. So, I will try to talk. Thank you. So the first part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about basically what our process is, and I'm going to try to move through that pretty quickly so Jessica can talk about kind of some of the things we're seeing out there that are causing some problems. And so just a little bit of background, I don't want to talk about this too much, but part of why we do our work is ecology has a role to help enforce this law, the Water Pollution Control Act, and what that really is saying is that folks need to make sure that we're not causing pollution to discharge into the stream. So, that in the end, we do have that role, but our program is really spent trying to work cooperatively with landowners and focus on working with them to find solutions to make improvements on the property. And so, yeah, our role is there are different agencies involved in things like septic, the dairy program. We're going to hear from Michael in a minute. Our focus is work with the non-dairy livestock owners. So this is kind of this is basically an outline of the work that we do in working out here in the community. We spend quite a bit of time monitoring and building upon the monitoring data that other folks are collecting. And so we've selected our focus being in the Bertrand Creek watershed. We've established some different sample locations to help guide our work within the watershed. We use that information to make outreach to landowners and try to discuss some of the solutions that can be made on properties. We make sure that folks have the assistance they need, the technical assistance and financial assistance that can help them make the improvements they need. So, we can work with landowners and try to provide them advice on things that they can do to prevent pollution, and we make sure that they know they can make outreach to folks at the CE who can work with them as well. And there's a number of different financial programs out there. I see what you mean, looking this way, talking to the mic. So there's a number of different financial programs where they can be pretty generous to make sure that people can get the infrastructure improvements made on the ground that they need. And we try to spend a lot of time out in the watershed and be present and trying to have a good sense of what we're seeing and what some of the sources of pollution are out there. And we also try to spend a lot of time meeting with landowners and ask to look at their property and walk around with them and talk to them about how they manage their animals and their manure and how things change seasonally, and try to understand with them how water basically moves to their property might get into some of the streams and ditches. And so, yeah, it's a process where we're trying to communicate what we're seeing and making sure that they get the assistance they need to make the improvements to prevent pollution from going to the water. And as a last resort, there is an enforcement ability there. So if folks are, if we can't make it work on things cooperatively, there is an opportunity that we can escalate things somewhat. So back to monitoring. So Erica, oops, button.
You got it.
I know the pointer.
Top red one.
Top red button. Okay, so Erica mentioned they're sampling down in the lower part of the watershed. We established the green dots. We established 10 sample locations in Bertrand Creek to help us better understand, better characterize where some of the higher concentrations of fecal coliform pollution might be coming from. It included establishing 3 locations up at the border to help understand what is coming across the border. So based on those results, we've been trying to connect with landowners upstream of those places where we are seeing high counts, where there are non-dairy sites, and also coordinating with the other agencies such as Department of Agriculture when we see things that, in situations where dairy or septics might be contributing to pollution. So yeah, our work is really data-driven, and that's what we're trying to do. So these are just a couple of numbers to help describe kind of how we've done as far as working with landowners. So in our survey, we identified approximately 86 properties that have, or we believe have, non-dairy livestock. We've been trying to make outreach with some of those places, in those places where we're seeing high counts. Of those sites, we've seen about, of those people we worked with, about 30% of them, these are rough numbers, about 30% didn't need to make any improvements. We felt really confident that there wasn't going to be pollution coming off their property. And of the folks that we've been working with, about 30% have made pretty significant improvements to ensure that pollution isn't coming off their property. And of the folks we've been working with, about 10% we feel like still need to make some changes. And just, you know, the reality is we do take enforcement. We've taken some enforcement, some level of enforcement against about 7 property owners. And most of those are actually just warning letters describing officially that there are laws and they need to be preventing pollution from going on with their property, leaving their property. So they are not fines, they're just basically a little bit more direction on what needs to happen. So I'm going to turn that over to Jessica to talk about some site conditions. It's graceful exchange.
Okay, hopefully that works. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so my name's Jessica Kirkpatrick, as Chris said, and we're just going to take the next part of our presentation just to show you guys what some of the conditions are on properties, non-dairy livestock properties, that we've been seeing pretty much since we started the program in mid-2012. Not all of these, the conditions that have the potential or the high risk to cause discharges of basically manure contaminated water into our local streams and ditches. So first right off the bat, because I'm going to show you a bunch of not so great looking photos, and then that's sort of the purpose of this, but we do want to acknowledge that, like Chris said, we do surveys and about a third of people are doing great things on their farms. So we would like to acknowledge that there's a lot of people out there that are implementing BMPs and really being conscious and taking the steps necessary to prevent the manure that their animals generate from getting into the water. So I just wanted to get that out of the way up front. I know that there's a lot of people doing a lot of great things out there, and the next few photos are going to focus on, you know, what are some of the sources of this pollution that we're talking about. So a couple of categories that are pretty important that we're going to see. These are just a rough category of where we see the problem. So first of all, are the challenges that people have. Some people have too many animals or many animals on smaller properties, and that causes challenges for them to manage that. The more animals and the smaller the property is, the harder it is to prevent those animals' feces from running off into the water. Secondly, overgrazed pastures that slope off into ditches and then eventually run off during rainstorms in the wintertime. Confinement areas, problems with where they're sited and designed and oftentimes maintained or not maintained. Manure storage, high-risk manure applications, and a really big one, I think, is livestock that are kept maybe year-round in pastures or areas that become saturated and run off during the wintertime. So first of all, poorly sited and managed confinement areas. The blue line right here, this is a tributary actually to, not Bertrand Creek, a tributary to Silver Creek. It's one of the lower down tributaries of the Nooksack River. And this is a confinement area. The animals have access to this whole area up through here. So obviously, there's some runoff problems there. Poor manure storage. So this is this site here actually doesn't even drain to the Nooksack, but it is in Whatcom County. This is obviously photos tend to flatten the landscape out. It's hard to photograph slopes. So I put some arrows in here. Kind of a steep little slope, and in the wintertime, this swale discharges pretty continuously off into tributary of the Sumas River, and these are manure piles up here. So, you know, there's people out there that are keeping sometimes even just a few animals, but over the wintertime they do get pretty good manure piles going on. So this is an example of an area that is probably it is a great pasture and a great place to keep animals, to pasture livestock during the summertime, because this stream is not here during the summertime. This is very dry, and probably 4 months out of the year, this is just a very dry place. But in the wintertime, this becomes a pretty good little tributary, I think, to the Cave Creek system there. So, and when animals are kept on there past that period in the summer when it's dry, then you have the potential, or actually, you know, this is a certainty that the manure that is kind of ground into the mud here is running off with the water. Seasonal sheet flow. So this is kind of an interesting one, and one that is hard to see from the ground, actually. So up here, we have animals that are being pastured, maybe 15 to 20 in total on a larger property. And this is, I think this photo may be April or March, something. But even when you're walking out here, we kind of walked out here and hopped over this little stream right there, you know, from 5.5 feet from the ground. You don't get a sense of the vast areas that are covered in, you know, barely surfacing groundwater and that flow off during every little rain event in the wintertime. But obviously these animals are pastured, and it's probably not a huge input, but they are depositing manure on the ground, and that's flowing off into this tributary of Bertrand Creek right there. And I would say also that this is probably one of the most common sources that we come across out there. It's much more common than animals actually having access to, say, a perennial stream, which is fairly rare in Whatcom County. And again, this is another picture just to drive it home. This pasture has been grazed really heavily by large animals, and it's flowing off into the seasonal stream. And again, pastures, we see them, and I put 3 pictures in here because it really is one of the most common conditions that we see out there. We see animals that in the summertime and much of the year actually are great pastures, but in the wintertime, much of the landscape out here is saturated. There's a lot of ponds, there's a lot of sheet flow happening. Again, photographs tend to flatten the landscape out, but this is actually, this slope, I think you can kind of see the slope here. This is in the category of poorly timed manure applications, and particularly, you know, the non-dairy folks, they have solid manure, so they don't generally have liquid manure when we're talking about non-dairy livestock. And a lot of that does end up getting applied in the wintertime. This is February of 2014. Pretty good application of solid manure. Here's at the bottom of the slope, there's a ditch that is a tributary to, I can't remember what stream at this point. And also the timing right here, over 1 inch of rain fell during the 3 days before and after this photo was taken. So pretty poorly timed manure application, and I think we can say with a little bit of certainty that there's water that was running down this slope and into that ditch. And on the way, picking up the pathogens in this manure and taking it with it. Something that we see during cold periods in the winter, there's not that many periods where the ground actually freezes solid in the winter here, but we do have a couple of them. And what happens is that it's a pretty common mindset that frozen period is an opportunity for people to get equipment out on the landscape and dispose of some manure that they have building up, and so that's what happens. That's what happened in this case. Good. I think we're almost overgrazed pastures. I have less than a minute to go right here. So overgrazed pastures. This is actually only 2 horses that managed to, because they had continuous access here, almost completely denude a small pasture. And finally, lack of maintenance. Just because we put a BMP up once at some time doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be maintained. And so a lot of what we deal with is poor maintenance on very old infrastructure, sometimes dating from the early periods of the dairy industry here. A lot of non-dairy ag has moved into small, older dairy facilities. All right, that's it.
Thanks.